far the nation has come over the last few years. It's important to remember the fiscal and economic disaster that President Obama inherited. We were losing more than 800,000 private sector jobs a month when the President took office. We're now gaining more than 200,000 private sector jobs a month. That is a dramatic turnaround by any measure. The President deserves, I think, considerable credit for that success. And I would note that Secretary Geithner deserves credit for the part he has played in that performance as well. In the fourth quarter of 2008, the economy contracted at a rate of nearly 9%. Positive economic growth returned in the third quarter of 2009, and we have now had 10 consecutive quarters of economic growth. We see a similar picture in private sector job growth. As I noted, in January of 2009, the economy lost more than 800,000 private sector jobs. Private sector job growth has now seen 23 consecutive months of growth. And of course, we'd like to see even stronger growth, but nonetheless, we have seen a dramatic turnaround. I believe the President's budget would continue to move the nation in the right direction. I think we all know that we have more that needs to be done in terms of dealing with our long-term debt. According to the administration, under the President's budget, the deficit as a share of the economy would fall from 8.5% of GDP in 2012 to 2.8% in 2022. That represents real progress. In terms of revenue, the President's budget actually calls for a lower revenue level than we reached during the Clinton administration, and a lower revenue level than called for in the final year of the bipartisan Bowles-Simpson plan, which I was part of. Revenue reached 20.6% of GDP in 2000 during the Clinton administration, when we were experiencing the longest period of uninterrupted growth in our nation's history. That ought to tell us something. The Simpson-Bowles plan called for a revenue level of 20.6% of GDP in the final year of its plan. In comparison, the President's budget calls for a revenue level of 20.1% of GDP in its final year of 2022. Some of my Republican colleagues have argued that revenue should not exceed 18% of GDP. But on the 5 occasions when the budget has been in surplus since 1969, revenues have ranged between 19.5% of GDP and 20.6% of GDP. We will likely need an even higher revenue level in the future because the country now faces an unprecedented demographic situation with the retirement of the baby boom generation. Let me just say, I'm part of that generation. I'm going to be retiring. I'm going to be eligible. I'm not going to be taking Social Security anytime soon. But nonetheless, I am part of a generation that is going to be retiring, and that's not a forecast. These people have been born. They're alive today. They're going to retire. And they are going to be eligible. The fact is, we are also facing growing income inequality in this country. We've seen the wealthiest among us become much wealthier, and we've got nothing against people becoming wealthy. I think we all hope that as many people as possible will be successful and become well-to-do. That's a good thing. But what the share of the burden is in our society is not fair. This chart shows that since 1979, the pre-tax household income for the top 1% has grown about 240%. Over the same time, the income for the middle quintile, the middle 20%, has grown about 19%, less than 1/10 as much. And our tax system is certainly contributing to this income inequality. The Bush tax cuts for 2001 and 2003 were particularly notable for how much they were tilted to benefit those who are the very best off. The effective tax rate for the wealthiest people in this country, the rate actually paid after factoring in exclusions, deductions, credits, and other preferential treatment, has fallen dramatically. The effective tax rate for the 400 wealthiest taxpayers in America dropped from about 30% in 1995 to 18.1% in 2008. Certainly, we can have a more fair distribution than that. As the Fiscal Commission and the Group of Six proposed, we can make the tax code simpler and fair. We proposed additional revenue, but not by raising tax rates, but by reducing tax expenditures, broadening the base, using some of that revenue to actually reduce rates to make the country more competitive, but to do it in a way that maintained the progressivity of the system. Actually improve the progressivity of the system in the case of the Fiscal Commission and the Group of Six. Adopting comprehensive tax reform will spur economic growth and allow us to compete better in the global marketplace. Here's how the Congressional Budget Office Director described the economic benefit of tax reform in his testimony before this committee. He said, and I quote, "I think analysts would widely agree that reform of the tax code that broadened the base and brought down rates would be a positive force for economic growth, both in the short term and over the longer period. I recognize the difficulty of considering comprehensive tax reform in an election year. I'm a realist, but I'm also hopeful. Because I think if we're honest with each other, we know we are on an unsustainable course as a country. I applaud the President for the blueprint he's laid down. It's a step in the right direction. I also believe deeply that we've got to do more. And we really need an economic two-step. In the short-term steps to increase demand, to strengthen the economy, but over the longer term, we need a comprehensive plan of tax reform, entitlement reform, and going after wasteful spending to take on this debt threat. If we don't, as a country, at some point we will face very severe consequences.